Okay, let's talk about nuclear power in the United States. So, currently we have 104 nuclear power plants in the United States. And so, this picture here shows the locations of those nuclear power plants. Now, you might notice that some of those nuclear power plants are located in bad places. So, do you see all the nuclear power plants that are in California? A lot of those nuclear power plants are very, very close to the San Andreas Fault. So you can imagine what might happen if there was a really bad earthquake. Those nuclear power plants could be damaged. Then you also notice that there's some nuclear power plants in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, up in Washington. And so those could be close to a volcano, or they could be inundated if there was a tsunami. So they're not really in such a good place. Then you see that there's also some nuclear power plants that are in the Gulf of Mexico, or on the coast around the Gulf of Mexico, and so they could be susceptible to hurricanes. So there's not really any good place to put a nuclear power plant. Even if you decide to put one in outer space, there's always the problem that maybe it would come down someday. So there's always going to be earthquakes, volcanoes, wildfires, tsunamis, tornadoes. So there's always going to be something that could be dangerous to a nuclear power plant. But remember, they do build them very, very secure. So the whole thing is covered in 6 feet of solid concrete in order to protect it. And so if a airliner was to crash into one of those containment vessels, it would not break through it. So it would just bounce off because they're so secure. You can see that nuclear power makes up 11% of the energy generation of the United States. So 11% of the energy that we use in the United States comes from nuclear power. And now what the problem though is that most of our nuclear power plants are around 50 years old, which means that they are starting to get to the point where they're going to need to be replaced. Concrete and steel can be damaged by radiation. So the radiation given off by the nuclear power plants can damage the concrete and the steel that they used to build the power plant. And so as that concrete and steel gets weakened, eventually it's going to fail. So eventually we need to retire those power plants. So we have a choice. We could either build new power plants to take their place, or replace them with coal, or replace them with natural gas, or with wind, or with solar. So we're going to have to come up with some other energy source to take their place, or reduce the amount of energy that we use by 11%. So one way or another, we're going to have to make some hard choices in the future about nuclear power. And here's just some information off the internet. So the amount of nuclear fuel used by a single nuclear power plant per year, 29 tons of uranium is used. But look at the amount of coal that is used by a coal-fired power plant. So 4 million tons of coal have to be dug up out of the ground and then used in a coal-fired power plant. Then the total amount of United States nuclear waste produced per year as of 2022 was 2,000 tons. So 2,000 tons of radioactive waste are produced by a power plant. And then the total amount of nuclear waste in the United States as of 2022 was 90,000 tons. Now, what are we going to do with it? Well, right now, most of this radioactive waste is stored there at the nuclear power plant. So they basically have a swimming pool that they take all of this radioactive waste and they put it into the swimming pool and they just leave it there. So they leave it there to decay, and given enough time, it will. So it's going to decay into something that's safe. It's just, how long is it going to take for that to happen? Well, the amount of radioactive waste that dissipates after 1 year is 80%. So 80% of nuclear waste disappears after only 1 year. But that still leaves you with 20% that can take thousands of years to go away. So what are they thinking of doing? So in the United States, we have Yucca Mountain. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it's a salt mine where they want to take all of this radioactive waste, transport it across the United States to this facility where they will store it about a mile underground in an abandoned salt mine. And so it's going to be pretty safe from water because water would be absorbed by the salt. It's also, there's not been very many earthquakes that occurred there, otherwise the salt would have shifted around. So we know that from a geological standpoint, it's pretty safe to put it down there. But then you got the problem of transporting it across the United States. So they have built these containers which are pretty much indestructible. They've taken these plastic containers and they've dropped them from an airplane onto the ground from 30,000 feet just to see what would happen. And they don't break open. They've taken these containers and they've run a train into them to see what would happen, and they couldn't break them. They're also, you don't have to worry about anything leaking out of them because they're made out of plastic. So that the transport of this stuff is pretty safe, unless there's a terrorist who might steal the material. So this stuff is taken across the United States in unmarked trucks. So the next time that you're out on the highway and you're passed by some semi-truck, well, just think of what could be inside of that semi-truck. And then the total amount of carbon dioxide produced from coal per year is 1,300 million tons of carbon dioxide. So how much carbon dioxide does a nuclear power plant emit? 0. So a nuclear power plant doesn't produce any greenhouse gases. So that's very safe for the environment, assuming, of course, there's not an accident that occurs with it. So how bad can accidents be? So here is kind of like the Richter scale of nuclear power. So you know that the Richter scale tells you how bad earthquakes are. So you have, it starts with a 0 and then goes all the way to 9 or 10, with a 9 or a 10 being the worst possible earthquake. So on this chart, it shows you how bad a nuclear accident is. So you've got a level 1 nuclear accident is down there at the bottom, and you can read the captions and you can see that it's not so bad. Level 1 nuclear accidents occur quite often, okay, but they're not dangerous. It's mainly a mistake. So a mistake with the bending the rules or breaking the rules. But then as you go higher on this scale, you see that the accidents get worse and worse. And so up there at the top you got Chernobyl. So Chernobyl was a very bad nuclear accident, and you can read about it on the internet. Since then, you had Fukushima. So Fukushima occurred in Japan, and I would put Fukushima probably at a 6 because it did emit lots of radiation, but not so many people died as a result of it. Okay, let's take a break, and when we come back, let's talk about how do we measure radiation.